Good day, everybody. It's Calxiyn here, and if you guys enjoyed this video, you should subscribe for more RWBY videos, and this video is brought to you by my patrons and my YouTube membership members, so thanks to them for the support. Today we will be looking at the RWBY fairy tale book again, and we are looking at the two brothers, which is super interesting because we already have a version of this story explained by Crow in the show, and now we have this story in the fairy tale book. So even though I am going to do a bit of like a fairy tale, like mythology analysis like I've been doing, I'm basically going to be sort of comparing these side by side. Like, what did Crow tell us? What did we get in the Lost Fable? What do we have now? And so that's going to be sort of interesting to have that comparison and see how the fairy tale has been expanded upon. Now, something interesting, like, it's funny that in the book, Crow recorded this fairy tale for the fairy tale book. So if you guys don't know, if you look throughout the fairy tale book, each character has recorded a story. So you have the warrior in the woods, I think is Glinda, for example. I think the hunter's children is Port. I think it's Professor Port. And so it's funny that Crow recorded this fairy tale, but there's a lot of considerable differences in how he told it around the campfire compared to how it is written down in the book. And then the other thing on top of that is that we hear in Volume 4 that this is how Crow was explained to it by Ozpin. So even though Crow is recording it, Crow was actually first told the story by Ozpin. Now I'm guessing that Crow just told them the Cliff Notes version because it was more about the relics and the gods leaving the relics compared to how humanity came to be, kinda. Like in that story that he was telling Jean, Ren, Ruby, and Nora and all that stuff. But yeah, I just thought that that was interesting. The very first difference we have is actually how the gods came to be. And this is like an extended explanation that was not included in the Lost Fable and also is not included in Crow's story, and basically says that in the beginning, right? That's a very, like, you know, Genesis-y, like, Bible, like, mythology thing, like, in the beginning. In the beginning, there was a single dragon that traveled the universe alone, looking for signs of life, but basically he found nothing, right? And so he decided he was lonely, and so he would create an equal for himself. And the story says, even an all-powerful god cannot make something from nothing. So the dragon divided himself and all of his magic into two halves. So basically this dragon, this like sort of this god, basically splits himself in half so he can have a friend. That is basically it. And destroys himself, but also in an act of creation creates himself, right? And so this story is establishing some very like Full Metal Alchemist type rules, you know? Like, in order to create, you must also, like, destroy, like, the rules of alchemy and all that stuff. Like, you can't make something from nothing, and that's a sort of, like, reoccurring theme throughout the story. And so the dragon destroys himself in an act of destruction, but then in an act of creation, he sort of makes another half, if that makes sense. And so the old god is no more, and instead there is now a dragon of light and a dragon of darkness. And it's also noted here that each brother thinks that the other brother is a copy, and that one of them is the original, right? And so the god of light is like, yeah, I'm the original, I made you, whereas the god of darkness is like, I'm the original, I made you. Like, they don't seem to remember the fact that they were once one god and all that sort of stuff. And so that's, like, kind of interesting, because they are both the same, you know what I mean? They are both the same, but simultaneously, like, so different, and so that's kind of fun. And so it also says that they don't feel whole unless they're, like, together and around each other, and I thought, oh, like, that's kind of sweet, right? And then they go on to create the world with other living beings, right? That's Remnant, to quote-unquote entertain them, which is a little, like, eh. Now, this is where the fairy tale rejoins with Crow's story, but it's a bit more forgiving, like, to the god of darkness, if that makes sense. In Crow's story in Volume 4, he basically says, like, oh, the god of darkness creates forces of destruction to try and, like, destroy, like, his brother's creations of life and all that sort of stuff. Like, it paints darkness as sort of, like, the villain, right? The villain and all this. But in the fairy tale book, it's not necessarily, like, destroying his brother's creations out of, like, a malicious, like, you know, a malice or an evil, but rather, it's almost creating the opposite, right? And so, like, the god of light makes the sun, and then the god of darkness makes the moon. And, like, the moon is not, you know, a destructive force and all that sort of stuff. Like, we need the moon. The moon has a purpose in life. The moon, you know, controls the tide and stuff like that. And so, like, basically what I'm saying is I feel like we're getting into a very, like, Kingdom Hearts situation. And if you guys have never played Kingdom Hearts before, it's basically, like, 100% light is just as bad as 100% darkness. Like, darkness is not evil. Darkness is just what scares us more. But each one, like, in too much, it's basically, like, you can't have too much and you can't have too little. There needs to be a sort of harmony there, right? And so it's a little bit more forgiving to the god of darkness, because the god of darkness is not making, like, like destroying things, I guess. Like he's, you know, sort of making it so it's a balance, right? So the god creates trees and grass and plants and flowers, and the god of darkness creates deserts and mountains and jagged crevices in the earth. So I'm guessing that's like a canyon and stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, deserts and like rocky mountains and stuff, like those are still beautiful and they're also necessary. That's basically what I'm saying, is that the god of darkness is making stuff that is also necessary. Like deserts seem barren, but like deserts have a very complex ecosystem, right? You know? And so anyway, the god of light makes animals, and the god of darkness, in a specific reaction to his brother making the animals, makes the Grimm. And it's interesting that the story says that they are the dark reflections of what the light brother had made. And so we know this, obviously. The Grimm are distorted versions of real animals, right? We see the animals that the Grimm are based off all the time, like the Beowulfs, like they're based off of wolves, right? Like it all makes sense. And in Crow's story, he says it's because the god of darkness wanted something that shared his desire to destroy everything. However, in the fairy tale book, like I sort of said, it's more about balance. Like, this makes the god of darkness have a more justifiable point than him being like, evil, right? And like, Crow is just telling, again, the Cliff Notes story. He's telling what he heard from Ozpin and all that stuff around the campfire in Volume 4. This is obviously the one that's more sort of fleshed out, and so it's understandable that Crow would sort of be like, yeah, evil, right? Like, the creatures of Grimm, what are you gonna do? But like, in the actual written version of the story, it is more about balance. Like, darkness is not necessarily bad, light is not necessarily good, it's about the balance, it's about the circle of life, you know? And so basically the god of darkness sort of creates the Grimm to balance out the fact, of the animals, basically. Almost like giving them a natural predator, you know what I mean? Like, you can't have animals without them having prey, and like, you know, it's that whole sort of thing. And obviously animals in our world have natural prey, we don't have Grimm, but it's almost like that. Like, that's how he takes care of the problems of like the animals almost repopulating, in my opinion. It's like, okay, well, I'll make some Grimm, so no matter what the animal is, like even the mightiest lion could be struck down by the Grimm, and it's like, it's a circle of life, bro, you know? And so I think that that's sort of interesting. Like, you have to keep things lively, okay? That's what the god of darkness says. He wants to keep things lively, whatever. But there's also, like, the balance. You can't have endless forests because deserts have a place in our ecosystem. You can't have animals and not have them have prey, or else they'll overpopulate, right? The god of darkness creates earthquakes and volcanoes, and, like, listen, okay? The god of darkness, he seems to relish a bit in the destruction, right? He's like, look how they run, look how they die. Okay, that's a little so I see why Crow would portray him as like the evil one, but equally, right, the god of light made these creatures to be entertained too. So like, no one's entirely blameless here, you know what I'm saying? If the god of darkness is creating like a tornado to be entertained, like the god of light has equally created the creatures to entertain them. So I'm like, so then we get, like, the feud thing. And so Crow basically says in Volume 4 that they had some sort of feud or something. And it's not necessarily that simple either. The god of light asks, like, why do you take pleasure in destroying my creations? And the god of darkness says that the god of light takes joy in creating things, and so now he can do more. Like, if things are destroyed, that means he will be able to create more. He'll do more creating, and that's what he likes to do. Which is sort of, I think that's sort of cute. I think that's sort of funny. Maybe cute's not the right word, but anyway, you guys understand what I mean. You know, if nothing ever dies, nothing more can be created, right? Because then again, you have an overpopulation problem. Like, you wouldn't have room for any more creations. And the god of light is like, but they have feelings, and the god of darkness is that they don't have the same comprehension of like the past and the future and the consciousness. Like, a rabbit is not going to have an existential crisis about life and death, guys. You know what I mean? That is what the god of darkness is saying. But they still do have feelings. I do agree. The animals do have feelings, but like, it's a circle of life, bro. But the god of light apparently is connected to all his creations and feels some of their pain. And it also reiterates, right, you can't fashion something from nothing. Everything that is on Remnant is made out of the gods. It's like they're giving a little bit of their juice each time to create these creatures, right? But I wonder if, like, when something is destroyed, does that magic go back into the god of light and darkness? You know what I mean? Like, when a rabbit is killed, he feels the pain, but does that rabbit magic come back into the god of light? Because, or else his magic would eventually be finite. You know what I mean? Like, himself, like, the pieces of himself would eventually be finite. So do we have sort of, like, a rejoining of the creations? Like, when something dies, do they rejoin the god of light's body so he is therefore able to continue to create again? because they are gods, right? So I can't see them having a finite power limit, but the way that it talks about it is like, you know, they keep giving pieces and pieces and more pieces of themselves. But, like, do those pieces ever come back to them is, I guess, my question. I don't have an answer to that. And so it's not because of a feud, but rather because he wants his brother to understand how he sees the world, right? The God of Light is like, I want you to see the world how I see it, brother. Like, and so, you know, to understand the responsibility of creation, they should create something together. That's what the God of Light suggests. And so it's not necessarily like to end a feud. They weren't really fighting yet. They do, something does happen later, but we'll talk about that. And so, yeah, this is basically what happens, is that they make a deal that, you know, the God of Darkness won't make decisions about the fate of this creature, you know, wiping them out, like, without, you know, thought, like wiping them out on a whim, and, you know, to rule this world or ruin this world, and all that stuff. Like, humanity will have that choice, so, like, don't wipe them out, and we'll make them intelligent, we'll make them capable of understanding what they are. It's basically, like, there's a bunch of, like, conditions, and the God of Darkness is like, yeah, I would like something that's intelligent as we are. You would think that this is exactly what the God of Darkness did in The Lost Fable. Like, if you rewatch the snap and all that stuff, the God of Light was like, okay, brother, but, like, don't wipe them out on a whim, okay? Right? You know? But if you rewatch the scene like I have, it's interesting that the God of Darkness decides to do this, but the God of Light is just like, right? The God of Light is like looking away. He's not like, brother, no, right? He's looking away as if he agrees with the decision, but he cannot watch, right? And so, in a sense, like, they both did decide to get rid of all the humans. And so I found that line interesting, and then later, possibly off screen, I think they both decided to bring them back, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, I just found that interesting, because obviously, like, hey, promise you don't wipe them out. Like, that's a little bit of irony for us as the audience, because we know what happens in The Lost Fable. But at the same time, like, humanity still remains, and it seemed like the God of Light did actually agree with that. And, you know, the God of Light says, like, you know, they will walk the face once again, like humanity, right? And so I wonder if the God of Light, like, brought them back one last time and made that sort of deal with his brother, like, okay, one big test, like, I get it, you needed to destroy these humans, but what about one more time? And we just didn't see that on screen. It just sort of happened, like, by the time Ozma was reincarnated and all that stuff. I don't know, I'm just saying. But, like, remember, in the fairy tale, it does say you can't make something from nothing, and so maybe the God of Light used the dust left over from the old humans to make these new ones, like we've sort of theorized, and so that fits in with the Full Metal Alchemist exchange of it all, you know? The humans were destroyed, but he took the sort of dust, the remnants of the humans, and then brought them sort of back. You know what I'm saying? And so that's how I sort of see that, like, how the humans returned and all that stuff. The God of Darkness gives them knowledge so they can comprehend things like life and death, as well as themselves and their world, and the God of Light gives them free will, so they have the power to decide what to do with that knowledge and choose. And so I really like that. In terms of, like, fairy tale mythology stuff, it is usually, like, the darkness that gives human the knowledge. Like, if you think of, like, Adam and Eve, and, like, the snake is, like, Satan, and the knowledge fruit and all that sort of stuff, it is kind of always the darkness, but, like, it makes sense, because the God of Darkness is the one that's like, hey, I want things to be intelligent around here, you know? So it makes sense that the God of Darkness would have given the knowledge. So back to the circle of life, okay? The God of Darkness throws adversity their way, and then the God of Light sort of blesses them after it's done. And what's interesting is that the God of Darkness likes to test their limits and admire their resourcefulness. Like, if their houses go down because of an earthquake, he likes to see that the humans rebuild their houses even stronger than before, rebuild the walls stronger than before. And again, I think it's interesting because the God of Darkness is, like, not, you know, mwahaha, evil, if that makes sense. He's not evil in the sense he's like, watch how these humans suffer. Like, no, he likes the way that humanity is evolving whenever he's able to throw adversity their way, how they're able to become stronger through their hardships. And I think that's really interesting, and I think that's really true, right? Like, humanity needs hardships or we wouldn't, like, evolve, you know, we would just stay complacent. And in my opinion, the God of Light is a little too coddling, you know? He coddles them a little bit. And in the fairy tale, they do get into a fight, so I guess that Crow was right that they did get into a feud, but it just wasn't where he said. You know what I mean? Like, he said that they got into a feud and then they came together to make humans, but now it seems like this is the point where they're feuding and all that stuff. They basically get into a fight because the Grimm are around and the humans are having trouble fighting against the Grimm, which is like, And so this is where things get, I guess, off canon in a sense. Like, this is where things, like, if we look at the Lost Fable, things start to not add up. Because if Crow originally got the story from Ozpin and recorded the story down for the fairy tale book, Ozpin would have lied. Ozpin never told Crow about the world before. He never told them about magic and stuff like that. And so if he was telling the story, it makes sense, like, canonly, why this part is a little factually incorrect. Does that make sense? I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. So the Grimm hated humans because of the light they saw inside them and because they were jealous. The god of darkness had created the Grimm and forgotten them, but he was endlessly fascinated with humans. So that's super interesting, because we don't necessarily think of the Grimm as having feelings, but if they are creations from the god of darkness, like, maybe it's possible. I mean, like, animals have feelings, you know what I mean? And we've heard as Grimm age, they become more intelligent, right? And so I wonder if these older Grimm, you know, at least have that sort of instinct. Like, I've seen things where, like, dogs become jealous when, like, the parents, like, bring a new baby home and stuff like that. Like, that's a thing. I don't know, like, I've heard of dogs doing stuff like that. Like, oh, we just brought home our new baby and the dog is, like, freaking the fuck out, you know? And so I wonder if on instinct, Grimm could have those sort of feelings, right? Like, what we attribute to feelings, what it may just be instinct, I don't know, right? I don't know anything about that, but you guys understand what I'm saying? Now, here's something that's actually, like, wrong, I guess, that the fairy tale says. And so the god of light and the god of darkness get into a fight over the Grimm, right? The god of light saying that the Grimm are not truly alive, and the god of darkness creating more Grimm, right? Like, they just create more Grimm and more Grimm and more Grimm, whatever. And then the god of light gives them a special gift to defend themselves against the Grimm, right? And so that is sort of how it goes, is that the god of light sort of goes behind his brother's back because they're fighting and gives them a special power to fight against the Grimm. Now, here's what I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about a couple things. Like, I say this is wrong because in the Lost Fable, the god of darkness says, my own creation used against me. And that seemingly is implying to me that the magic was his idea, that the magic that they had in the Lost Fable, right, like, that was, you know, something the god of darkness wanted to do, and it was a gift from both of the gods. I think they say that in the Lost Fable, that magic is a gift from both gods. And so again, this is sort of like, oh, humans sort of rewriting history to make the god of darkness look like the bad guy, right? It's sort of that sort of thing where it's like, oh yeah, that god of darkness wouldn't want us to have something to defend ourselves, but, you know, they both gave them something. But actually, what I'm thinking about right now is that that special gift is not semblance or aura like most people would think. I think that they're talking about the Silver-Eyed Warriors, and this could have happened, I guess, like, after the snap, because I don't think that we see any Silver-Eyed Warriors, and there wouldn't be, like, a reason for it, but this could be, like, the creation story of the next world, that they decide to remake humans from the dust, but, you know, the God of Light is like, but they may not even survive to ever call us back, like, there's too many Grimm, and they sort of get into a fight that way, and the God of Darkness is like, well, I'll just make more, you know, to be sort of like a troll, I guess you could say, and so maybe that's special gift is the Silver Eyes. Like, it's never really said. Like, most people would assume, oh, that's semblance and aura. If they were reading this story in Remnant, they would think that, you know, it's that instead of magic, instead of Silver Eyes or magic, right? And so, I sort of think that maybe that is what it means. It means the Silver Eyes. That was the special gift given to protect them. But then it's like, but not everyone has Silver Eyes, so what happened? Like, only some humans got the special gift to protect themselves, and that's why I think that this is just sort of a broken telephone situation. You know what I mean? That the special gift from the God of Light was the Silver Eyes, but it also was magic originally, if that makes sense. So I think it's like a mixture of both. We have to remember the fairy tales aren't entirely literal, right? And so it's possible that the special gift that everyone's sort of thinking about, right, is semblance and aura. Oh, the God of Light gave us semblance and aura when that nasty God of Darkness wouldn't. Like, it's one of those things, right? But on the flip side of it, it could be sort of like that hidden meaning that when the world came back to give them, you know, sort of a fighting chance, the God of Light sort of distributed some Silver-Eyed warrior powers, if that makes sense. That his light was in some humans, but then the humans that were left over developed aura and semblance from the remnants of the magic that were in the dust and all that sort of stuff that were in, you know, the human dust and all that stuff. And so, yeah. In the fairy tale, they leave because of their conflict. So they leave because they're fighting too much about, you know, humanity, the Grimm, and all that stuff. But we know that that's not true either, right? We know that they left because of Salem. And in fact, like, the god of light and the god of darkness, they're not really in conflict at all, like the humans thought, right? In fact, like, they were pretty unified in dealing with Salem and the humans that turned against them. And again, it's interesting because we know the truth versus what is written in the fairy tale, and we can also assume what Ozpin lied to Crow about, because this is Crow recording the story that he got by Ozpin, right? And so it's interesting that Ozpin's like, yeah, the gods left because, you know, the Grimm, and they were fighting, but, like, that's not what happened, right? It was because of Salem, but Crow was never told that. And so it's interesting how we see how this fairy tale is incorrect, but we can sort of, you know, draw that back to, like, it's incorrect. I don't want people to think I'm saying it's incorrect as in it's a retcon. It's not. It's incorrect in a correct way from a canon perspective, right? The fairy tale has to be wrong because Ozpin never told Crow the whole truth. And so it's a wrongness that was intentionally put in there, I'm assuming, by, you know, E.C. Myers and Miles and Carrie and whoever else collaborated to actually, like, make these stories. It's an intentional wrongness. It's a wrongness put in there so we remember that these were written fairy tales by people that did not know what happened in the Lost Fable. And I think it also shows, like, humanity expects, like, oh, light and darkness, they're gonna be at odds, like, they're having a feud, whereas reality was, like, they were unified together when they left. They both decided to leave. They were like, yeah, screw it, let's go. And so the god of darkness suggests to wipe the world, whereas the god of light suggests they leave and see if they are worthy. And we know that both of these things happen. Like, the god of darkness does wipe the world, but I wonder if this could have happened, like, before we sort of got, like, the Ozma scene, and, like, we just never saw this as the audience, because I'm wondering if they, like, left the Earth, they just sort of stayed in space for a minute, and they're like, okay, calm down. You know, on this trajectory, it seems like humans could come back. Like, should we vacuum the dust? Should we vacuum that dust and take it with us? Or humans may come back, and the god of darkness could be like, yeah, let's go down there, let's make sure it's all clean and all that stuff. Whereas the god of light would be like, wait, like, let's leave and see, like, what develops of this. Like, let's do another experiment. Let's see if the humans will, like, grow back and what they'll grow back into and stuff. And they're both like, oh, okay, sure. But then the god of light, like, went down there, made sure some Silveride stuff was sprinkled in there just so they'd have a chance against the Grimm now that they wouldn't have magic anymore, and then they fucked off. That is personally, like, what I would say. And what I love about this story is at the end it says that they both transform themselves into a new continent at one end of the world. And if you look at RWBY, like, if you look at the map of RWBY, there's 2 dragon continents. And obviously, like, guys, like, you know, I doubt that they're actually in the dragon continents. But at the same time, what if they are in the dragon continents? And so here's what I'm thinking, right? If you guys didn't watch my video on the Hunter's Children, I sort of had this theory that at the very end of the show, the continents will somehow join together, or at least everyone will flock to the continents that are connected to each other, right? And make, like, one unified kingdom. So everyone will abandon Atlas, it'll just turn into fucking Antarctica or something like that. You know, like, no one's going over there anymore, and everyone will flock to the continent of Vale and Vacuo and just sort of, like, build a giant wall, and it'll be, like, one kingdom made up of all these different, like, beliefs and cultures, and they'll call that kingdom, like, something epic, and that's how the show ends. So when it comes to the dragon continent, right, if the god of light is one of them is of Mistral. You know what I mean? Like, Mistral is on the dragon continent, and so imagine the gods wake up, and it's just like, and, like, it just, you know, the god of light just comes out of the ground, and Mistral is no more, right? And if Atlas follows his volume, that's another thing. Like, I'm just saying, like, maybe the gods could also move the continents together as, like, a show of, like, unity or something like that. But I'm just saying that if the gods are called back, if they are really in the continents, those continents would disappear, and all that would be left as a connected place would be Vacuo and Vale. Right? So I'm just saying. And so that is it for me, everyone. I hope that you guys enjoyed this discussion about the fairy tale. I really do like how the god of darkness is portrayed here. Like, he's not that that, and I really like the parts that, like, knowingly contradict the Lost Fable, because it makes sense canonly that Ozpin would have lied to Crow, and Crow just wrote down whatever Ozpin said, right? And so I love all of that. I love all those nice little touches, and it makes it feel more real, right? Because these are the people of Remnant, and they would have not known. They would have not known about the Lost Fable, and so the stories that they are writing it with the sort of idea in mind that these all happened in a time of semblance and aura. They're not even considering magic, right? So yeah, that is it for me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.